Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Around the World Leaders, a show from the Red Path Network where your host, Dara, talks to various different Warhammer players from all around the world about their experiences with the game. Today, we're going to be talking to my good friend Ron about his attitude towards competitive gaming and how you might be able to take away some of that and improve your own mindset for the game. So, grab yourselves a brew and let's dive into the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Around the World Leaders. I'm joined today by the wonderful Ron, who is somewhat famous, somewhat infamous, bit of an underground competitive gamer, I would say, in the World Leaders scene. Ron, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself to everyone on the Red Path who may not already know of you?
Hi, I'm Ron. I'm somewhat of an underground competitive gamer in the world eaters scene,
Did
I
you like
guess.
that intro? Yeah.
I'm like kind of just vibing on that and just want to leave it with that. That was a great intro.
Yeah, because like I feel like in the sense of like underground competitive whatever blah 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 is like so Ron's like very very good at 40k, extremely good in fact, but no one really knows about him because he thought it would be fun to play most of last season under a
Mhm.
different name in the ITC.
Yeah.
So we never knew that Ron was like actually killing it with war leaders and a lot of RTTs and stuff. But hung out with Jamie in ACO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, ACO, and then we hung out in the LVO. You were saying in the World Leaders Maniac House, and you had a pretty good run at the LVO, right? And it's awesome to talk to people who are very good at the game. But what struck me from speaking to you in Vegas was that you have a really interesting mindset when it comes to the game and approaching it from a sort of top-down meta perspective. Not meta in the sense of the competitive game, but like more like the actual meta of how you, the person, approaches the game, which I think is something that maybe not a lot of people consider. Everyone kind of takes that as like vanilla. We're all approaching the game in the same way, but it's not always the case. So I think what we'll do is we'll start off with trying to get a picture for why you play the army you do or the armies that you do, because you don't just play world leaders, but what drew you to world leaders and what's like important to you in picking an army to play in the first place?
Well, this kind of fits in with the way that I play and kind of how I view the game in general. But I started out with right when I started with Dark Angels and Custodes. And played them, and I played them each for like 3 games. I didn't really know that much about Warhammer, and I played 3 or 4 games with each of them. And then I was like, I don't really like this play style, but I like the game. And then I just went on like an ultra Google, Reddit, whatever hunt of what army in 40k is the most like the Leroy Jenkins WoW meme, like the thing where you just run in and like be ridiculous and it's not playing super cagey because I was playing really cagey with those other armies. What's interesting is that I've ended up circling back around to doing that a little bit with World Leaders too, but I was just looking to play memes. Like I just wanted a meme while I played, kind of. And then all of a sudden I started playing World Leaders, and really quickly it was like, oh, I found this cheat code to make the game more fun by playing an army that I really vibe with. And I think that that's such a important thing to do. And then once I started playing World Leaders there, while I play other armies, that became sort of the main staple of what I play.
That's awesome, yeah. And more recently, you've kind of hopped on a bit of the Blood Angels train as well, right? You're kind of like alternating between the two,
Yeah.
which is great. Like I think the list that you brought to the LVO really like jumped out at me as being like, oh, okay, this it really like matched your vibe and like your personality. I thought I was like, oh, okay, cool. It like makes a lot of sense that having spoken to you a little bit, this is the army you would play, which was tons of possessed and other fun MSU trade pieces and all the good stuff. And you did quite really well at the LVO, right? You had the best record out of all of us.
Yeah. Well, and also it's that thing. I mean, we'll probably talk about this later, but some of it in the like subjective viewing of win rate is that I did pretty well, but I also went 4-2 with 4 wins in a row, which meant
Mm-hmm.
that the win path and the players that I was playing were really strong, which is very fun. And then they also, of course, were like super cool, which is fun. But I did it with kind of like I think the list was a super good competitive list, but also like kind of a meme.
Yeah, it definitely was, right?
Yeah.
It like a world leader player, a good world leader player, one who's used to playing the game, one who's used to playing tournaments, would look at that list and be like, "Oh yeah, no, that's pretty tight. Like, I can see how all the parts of this function." But like, especially at the time, anyway, before there was a world leader codex out, you bring that to, we'll say, your game four, right, where you're 3-0, or no, sorry, your game five, right before you took a loss. So
Yeah.
going into game five, like some guy is like, "What the hell am I playing into here?" You know, it's just like
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
leaders.
Well, and there was still like, that's going to go away now, but I think there was a little bit of like the psyops happening where people also see the army and they're like, oh, this person's going to be trash. And then you're like, okay, all right, like, okay, we like, sure. But
Yeah,
that
for
that won't
sure.
happen so much anymore. But that definitely, there was a few things that I kind of like feel like gave a bump partway through. Like, like you play a world leaders list where everything is just going super fast, and then if you play people from that played earlier editions, they sort of, I think a lot of people have like scars from playing tons of berserkers 10 years ago,
Yeah,
like against them, I mean.
yeah,
And then so you play against that person and they play super scared because they haven't seen world leaders in years. And then you play against someone else who's just like, well, they're not meta, so they're going to be bad. And then they're playing super overly aggressive because they think your army is just going to be bad. But meanwhile, I'm there like, ah, let's just have fun.
yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's, I think a lot of it, not to attribute your success just to it, but I think definitely the vibe that I was getting. Part of the reason why you were doing so well was because of your attitude going into games and kind of the it was definitely a more laid back approach, right? That you were taking to the games. It's just like, oh, whatever happens here, obviously you're going in there to win those games, but like at
Yeah.
the same time, it was way more about like the fun that you were having. And I think that that's like a little bit of what I want to talk about here as well. Is like how, okay, in a very meta sense, not just tournaments, not just the LVO, but like how do you go into games of 40k? Like, what are you? I suppose what are you looking to get out of them when you go into just any game of 40k, be it in the store or in a tournament? Like, what's your end goal from that?
Well, the end goal, like, I always start from the beginning. The beginning goal of when I go in, like my initial thought of if I'm playing a game, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with somebody for 2 or 3 hours, right? So like if it's a friend or someone I play with frequently, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with my friend for 2 or 3 hours. If I'm meeting a new person, it's very like, oh, I'm meeting someone new. Like this could be fun. This could be really interesting. If you're at like a big event or a small event, or even if you're like local store and you're playing someone who's new, it becomes a thing where it's an opportunity to meet someone new and maybe they'll be super cool. You that'll be fun. And you're playing this game together and you're doing this thing that's a competitive game, right? Like there is like a winner and loser and you're keeping score. But really what you're doing is you're spending a bunch of time with someone. So I go in kind of being like, okay, what I want to happen here, what my goal is in 3 hours for you to not look back and be like, why the fuck is this what I just did with my past 3 hours, right? Like I want to look back and be like, what a great 3 hours that was. That was
Yeah,
super fun.
yeah,
Like I'm so happy I did that. What an interesting person to meet. Or what a good time I had with someone I already knew. It's definitely less about I want to win the game. I play to win, right? Like I'm not sandbagging my games. And I try to be competitive when I'm playing in the sense of like I'm trying to make moves that are strong. But it's I don't know, you're also just like you're just hanging out. We're just people like playing a game together. It's I don't know, it's fun.
yeah. Like it's not that deep, right?
Right. It's exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think the meme title or the meme concept that we had for this episode was that win rates are a social construct,
Dude,
which I think
they
kind of like,
are.
yeah, like for sure,
They
right?
are a social construct.
Because I think what you said there, at least in my opinion, anyway, it's obviously not the case for everyone. Everyone goes into a game of 40k looking for something different, but I think like you highlighted what I think is one of the most important things of playing 40k. That like at the end of the day, we're playing this like fun board game, right? And it's not like we're not professional athletes. We're not esports competitors, right? We're just a bunch of like dudes having fun, throwing dice around, playing with our toy soldiers, and like you should really want those like 2 to 3 hours to be very very enjoyable for both parties, right? Like you don't want to go into it being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like clobber this guy, make sure he has no fun, and like potentially if he like goes home crying about it afterwards, like yeah, nice, I have like asserted dominance here, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, there are like probably people who want that, but like those people are shit. So don't do that. Don't be like that. That's not nice.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think it's like a very healthy approach anyway to going into a game, and even like it reflects a lot in the army that you picked. You know, it's like playing world leaders because at least definitely before the new codex, maybe it's changed a little bit now, but like it was pretty difficult to like not have a fun game while playing world leaders and also while playing into world leaders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest things that like one of my biggest learning things I had, right? Because I didn't start playing until the beginning of ninth. I started collecting, getting into it at the end of eighth, but I got into playing at the beginning of ninth. And when circling through different armies or doing different stuff, whatever, last year for like a 2 month span after they got nerfed, I played Admech, and like in theory they weren't good, whatever, blah blah blah. But I played a really skew list that was really built around turn one Alpha Strike and turn one Alpha Strike shooting, and I played it for about 2 months. And in those 2 months, I did well, like won an RTT and like had a really high success rate in my games and like did whatever. But all the games felt terrible. Like I would play people, and then afterwards I would feel like I needed to apologize for the games. And I was like, that wasn't like someone might have just come an hour to play, like traveled for a little bit and then we play and it's like it just sort of I go and then the game's over. It just there was a whole vibe to it where the results as far as like if I look at my app at the score are good, but the feelings of the game are really bad. And those 2 months of playing an army like that really taught me a lot. And World Leaders almost never feels like that. Like the games in nature are always very interactive because they're combat focused, but also you don't have any sort of like ultra like rush where you can turn one and everything, right? There's a little bit of that with Invocatus right now, but even with that, you can't really turn one into everything. So just in nature, it becomes a really interactive army, which I really like.
Yeah. That's I think you said something there that's like really interesting and worth highlighting because it's like the way you put it where the score in your phone looks really good with like an X percentage win rate, but like your feeling of the games is not like the way you said you felt like you had to apologize, right? Like I think it's important for people when they're like evaluating playing games and the emotions associated with the games that like at the end of it, like you can look at your phone and you can be like, hey, I've got like a 90+% win rate, but like have I just like made a load of people feel bad because of the games that we've played? Like, have I actually actively gotten enjoyment out of it, or am I just like here to make sure that that number on my phone remains at a certain threshold? And in my opinion, I don't think like making sure that the number is like where you want it to be is necessarily the most important thing in the world, right? Because like at the end of the day, it should be about your enjoyment from the game rather than making sure that you're hitting a certain success rate. And I understand that some people, feel get their kicks out of hitting a certain success rate. It's the same as computer games, right? You want your KD to be a certain value or your in-game win rate to be a certain value as well, and that's fair enough. But I think it is really important to sometimes step away from the game, right, and say, like, where am I getting that enjoyment from? And am I making sure that that's like a healthy thing rather than necessarily something that's like the detriment to myself or my opponent?
Sure. Yeah. And it's also a thing too where, it's not, this isn't, not to be too deep, but this doesn't specifically pertain to like Warhammer. But if you're doing something with people, then it's important to remember that while like you're the protagonist in your story, you're not the only person there. So it is a very like, oh, there's another person here with me doing this activity too, and their time is valuable. And like that doesn't show up on the stats, right? But that
100%.
does
Yeah.
show up on like being a human,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. It's going to get real deep, folks, if you're listening. We're going to go down some serious rabbit holes here. I
know.
haven't had a conversation with you where it's like it hasn't fallen into some crazy, crazy rabbit hole at some point. But it's
Yeah,
such a
well, I
good
mean,
point, though.
that's just up.
Like when you think about it, like if you go to a tournament, right? You're going to play maybe 5 games on average, right? Your average DT 5 6 games. Those are 5 or 6 people who are there for more or less the exact same reason as you. Sure, maybe 5% of the people in the tournament are gunning for the top, and there might be 5% that are never going to make it out of the bottom. Vast majority of people, they're going 2 and 3, 3 and 2, 4 and 1. But they're all there to like have a good time, see how well they can do for themselves, and you're there as well, most likely for that reason, right? So I think once everyone gets on board with that idea, rather than like trying to shit on your opponent in every single game, it's like such a healthier environment. Like my favorite games in tournaments are like when you kind of rock up and you get the vibe of like neither of us really like. Obviously, we both care about the game here,
Yeah.
but like neither of us really care that much, and we're just gonna kind of mess around and have some fun at the table as well. And like maybe some silly things are gonna happen, and that's totally chill. But like it also, I feel like it leads to a healthier game state, right? Because and I know we spoke about this a lot. Is like the way that you play games, it's like loose is the word that you use, or quite open to takebacks and all that kind of stuff. And I think
Yeah.
that's very important, like in terms of your approach to the game as well. If you, I think you probably agree with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is like that's exactly the way that I describe it, and it's also because I think realistically, from a competitive sense, if you're playing the game and it's against a really good opponent or against really any opponent, there's really only a few moments that decide the game. There's not really this like slow burn throughout the game, so there's no reason to be super hovery and kind of like really like on fire. Like I have to focus 100% and like everything needs to be exactly right that the other person is doing and like blah blah blah. It just is. Most things are not consequential, and I feel like part of the learning curve of the game is realizing what moments are consequential and really trying to like lock down all of your bandwidth into getting those moments right, which also means that for 80% of the game or like 85% of the game, you can kind of just like fuck around. You could like leave the table, you can talk to people, you can do anything. I mean, don't go on
Yeah.
your phone necessarily, but like don't be rude, but
Just like walk away.
it, yeah,
Do Jamie's tactic,
don't,
just go
don't
to the bathroom for 2.5 hours.
yeah, exactly. Do the thing. Go to the bathroom for 2.5 hours, clock out, and then come back and just leave.
Yeah,
Like
pack up the toys, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's so true though. But so one thing that like I actively have difficulty with still, and I found so interesting when we were speaking initially, and even you reminded me saying it again, is noticing those pivotal moments in a game, especially in a competitive setting, the hinge moments where like the decisions that you make in this turn, in this round, or in this phase are going to be what actually swings the game. And I find it really interesting that like you can identify those moments, because I find it really difficult. And I feel like a lot of our listeners or watchers would be super interested to, I suppose, see how you go about doing that, if you can vocalize that easily. Obviously it's quite a difficult thing because it varies from game to game, right?
Well, it varies from game to game, and I also think it varies from player to player and player style to player style. So I have like it's not like one trick, right? Like it's an adaptive trick, but I almost always try to pivot the board. So my goal in the game is to try to put. I don't care so much about like what's the mission is or what the other army is or what my army is. The goal is for me to make as many points of my army face as few points of their army in as large a part of the board as possible. So to make that simpler, it would be like I want 2,000 points of my army to be fighting 1,000 points of their army on half the board, right? Because regardless of how strong my army is or their army, if I'm able to pivot the board where I'm increasing the odds as far as like unit size and unit amount, unit strength into a way that really swings into my favor, then I'm going to be successful on that part of the board. And then I'll have a lot of agency in the game to control the game state after that. So sometimes what that means, it means like in deployment, you'll identify like I had a game yesterday, right? We're in deployment. We played what's the one where there's the objectives like this. It's 6 objectives, and
Is
they're
that Abandoned Sanctuaries or
no,
10th
it's not Abandoned
Conviction?
Sanctuaries. Well, whatever. We played a mission where there's
The really weird layout one, anyway. I
yeah
think
the
it's
weird layout.
there's like
Yeah,
three slashed on each side, right?
there's one in your deployment zone. There's two in your deployment zone. And there's two like this. There's
Mm.
nothing in the middle. Whatever. It doesn't matter. The but
It
when we were
super
in
matters,
deployment,
actually.
what?
It matters.
Yes, yeah. When you're in the deployment zone, what happened was he had deployed his army sort of evenly spread out to two sides, but he put all his buffing characters on one side. And to me, that meant okay, like my big pivotal moment is going to be on turn one. If I can like kind of bait his uh, buffing characters forward so they stay on the same side of the board they're on, and then I rotate all my army to the other side, I win. Like regardless of what happens the rest of the game, I'll win when that happens. So all I need to really pay attention to is that turn. So you pay attention to that turn, and then the rest of the game sort of just plays out, and it's really fun, and like you have a good time. But also it means that you don't really need to like there's a point of like hyper focus and you're paying a lot of attention at deployment. And in that game, it was turn one, and it isn't like all of a sudden after that you table the person. It's just that you end up putting yourself in such an advantageous position as far as board state and like agency within how you can play that you there's not a lot of pressure to have to pay super close attention the whole time. I mean, I have things that happen in my games where like players that I play with regularly have had to deal with this where like I'll be in the middle of the game and I'll just like forget what I'm doing. I'll be like, are we playing Warhammer? Like what's happening? Like I'll be so loose that I just don't even remember where I am. I'll just be like, oh, we're just eating. I'll just be like eating some like chicken fingers or something, and then be like, oh right, I'm like also supposed to be paying attention to this game, not just like asking you about how your day was.
Yeah,
Like,
they're like, bro, we've been waiting you for to roll this save for like 10 minutes.
yeah,
Like I'm vibing
yeah.
the conversation that we're having, but please roll that save.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well,
Yeah,
no, yeah, yeah. I mean, the games go pretty fast generally, so I don't want to sound like I'm like slow playing anything. Like I play pretty quick games, but the it definitely does happen where like I once you get through those moments. What used to happen with Eighth Edition World Leaders is it was almost always. I think most of us played like big Deep Strike, a lot of stuff out of Deep Strike with
yeah, the host raptorial Talon bomb with all the lords and jump packs and
yeah,
6 inch
exactly. So
charges.
yeah, so that was there was a big Deep Strike vibes with that Eighth Edition Codex, and for almost all of us, I think that like go turn in that sense of like when you really need to pay attention is how you deploy your deep strikes, right?
Yeah,
Like that was
it
the
was
time where
super
you,
well defined before, right? Like it was
yeah,
because it got a lot more fluid and complex as the years have gone on. But like that's a really good like point to go back to because back then everyone was kind of playing the same thing, and
yeah,
we all just had to be like laser focused on bringing in pretty much like I think for me it was like 820 points in my army from
yeah,
reserve and just being like, right, I need this turn to really pop off or I'm in deep shit.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, good times, good times.
yeah. But that's what those moments are. I mean, like it's fluid, and depending on how you play, there's always gonna be those moments where it's like the time in which to hyper focus, kind of as
Yeah,
much as you can.
100%.
But it's not the whole game doesn't really like as far as like letting people do take backs and letting these different things happen. Like there's just a lot of fluidity to the game that's kind of like it doesn't matter a lot and you can kind of adapt to it as it goes, right?
Hmm.
But it's really like it's really individual moments. I mean, how many games do we play that are decided by 5 points, right? I would say only maybe under 10% of my games are decided by 5 points one way or another. So that means that there's bigger things happening than like, oh, this single move deciding the game. It's usually like, oh, I didn't, oh man, I really should have advanced that one character or whatever. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
someone's like, oh, can I do this? You're like, yeah, dude, it doesn't matter. And if it's a thing that really matters, then you'll be like, ah, well, we'll see. Like, depending on what it was, like,
Yeah, yeah,
but usually it just
absolutely.
doesn't matter.
That's it's super interesting because I feel like going into it with that attitude kind of leads to a more laid back game where people are having more fun anyway, which kind of
Yeah,
just leads to greater enjoyment in the hobby overall and having a healthier mindset with going into games and tournaments and all that kind of stuff. And effectively, it sort of circles back. It's like a feedback loop to everything we've already said, right? So I think it's super interesting. But I'm sure a lot of people want to know, Ron, what are your thoughts on the brand new World Leaders Codex? How are you vibing with it? I know how you're vibing with it, and I know it's quite different how I'm vibing about it. We can fight
uh,
it offline, but right now we're gonna pretend like we're real good friends and we agree on everything. Okay?
I wouldn't mean we're not fighting. It's just they're different,
I
and
take it
that's not even
personally
true.
when you come at my Leviathans, bro. I take it personally.
I I don't know. I also think that like mostly we agree. Like when I'm watching the other episodes or listening to you talk, I feel like mostly we're in the same camp of like there is just a kind of more competitive way to like play the army in the sense of that there is a base of a build that is the easiest to win with, but that doesn't mean it's the best because like it's really subjective of what you're having fun with, right? It
Yeah, for
goes
sure.
back to the same way you approach the table, like win with having something fun. Also, now I'm going to just tangent completely before I go back to the thing you're saying.
Let's
It's
go.
also
Yeah,
because
I'm here
like
for it.
yeah, because also like the win rate is like if you go 2 and 3 with an army that's like this S tier army with an S tier build, and someone else goes 2 and 3 with like just playing the thing they have fun with, who's really doing better? Like those are not that is a totally it's totally subjective. You can't just be like, oh, that's the same thing. It's not the same thing,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah. Like I at Broadsword like a couple of weeks back or a month back at this point, I went 2 and 3 with Angron. I had a
Yeah,
great time. I was just
yeah.
like, man, like people were like, oh, you disappointed with that. I'm like, yes, but also I got to throw the Primarch around on the table for 5 games, and it was freaking awesome. So
Yeah, well, it's like, are you? And then it's like, oh, are you disappointed with your weekend? Like, did you have a fun time? It's like if you had a fun time, then you're
yeah, the way
winning.
I said it is like I'm disappointed with the result, like the paper, the numbers associated with my name on that weekend. I'm disappointed with that, but like I had so much fun that like
Right,
I don't really care, which is like it goes back to what we said where if your enjoyment is tied to that win percentage number or how well you're doing, it can mean that like even though so in that situation if I really really cared about my win percentage, like I would not have had fun from that weekend, but because I don't really care about it that much, those games are
yeah,
still really enjoyable because they were fun games in and of themselves, right? So
right,
it's kind of about like hitting that angle, I think. Yeah,
yeah,
wow, we,
for
we
sure.
really went off on a tangent there.
Yeah,
i,
sorry.
I
Okay,
asked you
go
about
back
like
to
what
the
you think about the world leader codex.
back to the army and the new codex. New codex. I really like the direction of less stratagems that are all useful. I feel like the codex is like pretty half done. I don't like that. I don't feel like there's a lot of flexibility within the units, and like again, the thing of like echoing like small, medium, and big berserkers is cool, but there needs to be options. Like there needs to be options in how to build where you can be like, I'm not intentionally nerfing the army to be able to play what I want, right? And
100%.
Angron is cool because like with Angron, even though I don't think that that is the most competitively viable way to play as far as like if you're just hunting for win rates with winning with the highest score possible, right? Because even if you say like, okay, you can win with Angron fairly easily, it'll be a little bit harder to do most of the secondaries that prop up the army. But there's just a lot in the book that's cool, but it's like if you're taking it, you're just intentionally kind of gimping yourself, which I don't think is great. And then there's some stuff where, like with Invocatus as people play against, it's also super weird to call them Invocatus because I've called them avocado like every other time I've ever said
You
the
can call him
name.
avocado. We're we are not
Yeah, I don't know
professionals
why
here.
I'm not. I
Yeah,
have no idea why I'm not saying it.
it's not yeah, it's weird, man. Just call him avocado.
Yeah, I need to call them avocado. So in with avocado builds, there's a very like sameness to it when you're kind of doing it right, which is also I don't think is great, but is good competitively, right? Because that flow chart of decision making becomes really intuitive, and it actually does become kind of nice for like hanging out while you're playing the game because there's a really low amount of bandwidth it takes to kind of do the same thing every game. But as
Yeah, for
far
sure.
as the fun part of adaptive problem solving, it kind of tones that down a bit.
hmm
Yeah.
Okay,
So I don't know. I don't think Leviathan's like do you? I don't.
it's
If you
fine. It's fine. Okay, it's totally fine.
look, I'll just if you take all Leviathans with if you take max Leviathans and Angron, and you win an event, you'll be like a world eater's god. So
I mean, that is what I intend to do next weekend, as of time of recording this. Maybe this
perfect.
episode goes out after I've already done it, or maybe I just cut this bit out because I'm like too ashamed about going 0 and 5. We'll sort that out.
Yeah, whatever. That's what editing's
It's
for.
fine.
Yeah.
Production is amazing.
Mhm.
But yeah, like I think one thing that we were talking about before that really echoed with me and sort of like I definitely related to when we were talking about like how you felt about the codex was that it's like so close to being in a really good spot, right? And you made
It's
some
so
fantastic
close.
suggestions about what it would take to tip it over the edge. If you could just like run through those, give me like what you mean by like the book is actually really close to being amazing, but it
But
just falls short.
so there's a bunch of things where there's like there's enough units in the book that you could have like valid different options of what to do, but they're I don't know, it is just like micro changes by things like, take uh take core off of normal 8 bound, but then give it to jackals. And then all of a sudden the push and pull of what's happening there becomes much easier. Start making the war gear in line with where the war gear is for other armies as far as whether it costs things or doesn't. And then make Invocatus's warlord trait have the 9-inch restriction because that doesn't, some people are like, oh, that would kill like avocado's like whole thing, and I'm like, no, it wouldn't. It would just mean that you still have a ton of agency pre-game to move around things in your deployment zone. You still have a ton of agency to um, stage for turn one, but it just cuts down on some of the like, oh, I just want this win path where I can just do this one thing. If the person's not that good, I just win because they deployed wrong, which is like, I don't know. It's a book that's so close with such small changes to having a lot of options, but it doesn't have a lot of options right now.
Yeah.
And specifically going back and forth so far between playing that and Blood Angels, like World Eater is just really fun to play, but right, there's no more sort of like supported by GW set of armies or rules or whatever than the Space Marine selection, right? There's so many models and there's so many data sheets,
You
and
got
then
like over 100 data sheets in that
yeah,
book.
exactly. So you can really feel the differences between when the build of the army starts to feel very samey, but then you also feel how micro adjustments can really change how much the army can do. I also think that there needs to be some adjustments to the secondary scoring
100%.
because
Yeah.
the book is I think the book is propped up by the Codex is propped up by the Arcs book. It's not propped up by the Codex.
Real for sure. Like, I would say it would not shock me if our like average win rate, the like faction win rate, dropped by like 15 to 20% if our secondaries got nerfed.
Yeah, for sure. Which like I'd be fine with, right? Like
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think it would make the army any less fun to play and going back and being like it's about having fun and like enjoying the game. And if you're having fun, you're, succeeding kind of. It's not
Yeah,
what
like
are you
for
trying to do
me,
here?
like it was a great meme the first couple of games I played when my opponent was like shooting me on objectives and I was like, "Ha, I'm getting points." And
Yeah.
now it's just like I feel like I'm trolling you. Like,
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
also
it
it's
is like it. I do love the energy of just like when you're deploying and there's like an objective in the middle of nowhere, and you just like put a spawn down.
yeah.
That will never get old. I'd just be like, all right, what are you gonna do? You gonna shoot him because that's a blood tide point and a victory point.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm gonna
It's
do with that blood tide point? I'm gonna trade it in for more victory points.
Yeah, exactly. I also get like I get like a lot of enjoyment out of literally just putting spawn places, like the act, like lifting them up
Yeah.
and placing them down because it feels so goofy. Like the other day I was sort of like watching and helping a little bit another World Leaders player who's newer to World Leaders, who's in my local store, who's just started them, and he was deploying his spawn by rolling them onto their spot and just letting them go wherever they landed. And he was playing like another good player. They're both people who go to GTs and like they're playing competitive game. And he's just rolling his spawn out there, like bouncing them to their spots and being like, "That's where the
Incredible.
spawn is."
I mean, it makes sense. It make like Spawn are just. I mean, they're just so good. You know,
Dude, they're
I've always had
hilarious.
an affinity to them. Like for real. Before we drift away from the topic on the Spawn, like I'm gonna pitch this to you. Units of like 4 to 5 Spawn. Just give me your elevator thoughts on that.
So I use a unit of 3 spawn in a weird thing is that like the new World Leaders Codex doesn't feel super different to me from my Nephilim list, like the play style and like what it is, because I ran Max Possessed and then Warp Talons, which is kind of like a
It's kind of the
weird.
same. It's just your possessed have more attacks now.
Right. It's kind of like the Warp Talons got upgraded to 8 bound and the Possess got upgraded to Exalted. Like everything's just better but more expensive, whatever. But in that list, I ran 3 spawn and like a unit of 3 spawn. And I was always like, this unit is like kind of sneaky good,
Yep.
right? Because it's cheap. It's the same cost as a unit of um,
10 jackals of the skull
Jackals.
masher. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same cost as a unit of Jackals, but it's a little bit tougher. So if it's a thing that you want to just like leave in the back, right? Like you want to just leave it, and then it's the kind of thing that you secretly bring out. Like not secretly, I mean they're just being spawned like derping around in the back.
There's nothing secret about a
Yeah, it's not really
Spawn.
secret at all. Secret is
Those
probably not
guys
the right word.
project.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that they could be solid. I think that there's an opportunity for that to have some play.
Yeah.
Um, like,
It's
you
something
know,
I want to try out. I think I'm. Yeah. I don't know.
I
It's
don't know
a,
if you want to be doing like 5, right? Because when you get to 5, all of a sudden you're starting to be like, okay, I'm trading this unit for a unit of Berserkers, or I'm trading this unit for 3 8 bound. But
yeah,
if you're
three
talking about,
three spawn costing the same as like 10 jackals feels a
right,
lot better than
yeah,
the a unit of 5 berserkers. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly. That's
yeah.
what I think so too. And because like the Jackals, if they're the meta I play in a lot, there's not a lot of, which I think is good. I think there's a lot of like handshaking that happens in 40K that goes away when you start playing people who are more experienced, maybe. Of I'm just going to leave some like bullshit unit on my home field objective, and that gets super punished where I play. So you can't
Yeah,
just leave like, oh, I'm just putting 10 cultists on this home objective, and then I'm going to leave them alone all game because someone's just going to kill the cultists, and then you're going to have to start sending stuff backwards that you don't want to send backwards. And
100%. Yeah.
Spawn usually have a little bit more toughness than that. So I think they're a good counter to people wanting to do that. And that if you still want to take jackals, that lets you sort of move them up the board a little more freely.
Yeah. It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, what an interesting point to leave off part one on. We started
Oh,
talking about how you got into the faction, and now we're talking about Spawn. So we're gonna cut to a quick break, and then we're gonna come back for part two. Stay tuned, folks. Coming up soon. Welcome back to part two of All Around the World Leaders with my good friend Ron. Now there is a quotation from a great man who was walking with me down the interstate, possibly in Las Vegas. I'm not sure what the name of that road was, but it was a long walk anyway. And you said something to me, Ron. You said competitive and casual are not on the same scale. And that really resonated with me because a lot of people, I think, they ask you, are you a competitive player or are you a casual player? And you think that, and I agree. I'm a full convert now. You think that they're not the same kind of like bracket, right? That you can be casual and competitive, and vice versa. Why don't
right.
you break that thought process down for us? Because I think it's super interesting.
Okay. Also, I just want to throw out that the walk we were on was not that long. It was like a mile.
No, it wasn't long at all. Some
Some
of
of
us
us.
might have found it really long and complained the whole way.
We're talking
But that
about
wasn't
Jamie.
us two.
No,
Might
we're
have been
talking about
another member
Jamie.
of the Red Path. We're not going to name names, but
I'm literally saying Jamie.
okay, cool. Yeah, it was Jamie.
That was, yeah. So like, if there's an access where people say competitive and casual, and I get that it's sort of shorthand. They're not being literal to an extent of saying that competitive is, people playing like sort of win at all costs, yada yada yada, strongest armies, trying to be meta, trying to win the game. And casual is people doing not doing that, I guess. And or sometimes people also say like, oh, beer and pretzels. And I'm like, it's just those are two totally different scales. There's one side of the scale. There's one scale where it's like on one end you have kind of hovering over the game and really like wanting to have like high focus the whole game and being very serious about everything, trying to get everything to like an exact measurement all the time perfectly. You're not really talking about anything except for the game. um, you're like very much your environment that you are in, like the environment that you are experiencing as the player is the board. You're not really experiencing the environment of the room or of the people, right? You're just on the board, just focusing on that. And the other end of that is um, like that's like, to me, that this is the casual scale, right? That's a very not casual way to play. That is a way of playing where you're really like hyper focused. It's very serious. And then on the casual side of that, there is the like I'm like paying attention and talking to my friends, and like people are coming over, I can kind of just like bullshit with them, and then I'm gonna like order some food, I'll have a beer, like, do you want a beer? Like we're just talking. I don't need to, like, you're rolling your dice, I'm rolling my dice. I don't have to stare at everything the whole time. Like everything is just happening in a little more of a fluid way, and the approach is a lot more casual, right? Which is why I say that that's the casual realm, because that's the only way to really describe it, is by playing more casual. But then a total separate spectrum is being competitive, because you can be really competitive and play a competitive list and aim to play competitively, which is that you want to win and you're taking a list where you're trying to win and you're aiming to win the game. You're aiming to make the best plays you possibly can, right? That's what it is to be competitive, is to try to win the game. And then the other end of that is I would say, is narrative, right? Where you're just aiming to sort of collectively just tell the story, right? The win is completely part of, like, not a goal. It's just to tell a sort of story of what's going on. And you can play competitive narrative too, but the like furthest end of that side would be someone who's just everything they take is flavor. Everything they do is because they're going to go home and just write down the story of what every unit did, and they don't even care because it's just about like the story. You know, I don't know anyone who actually plays that way, but I'm just using the kind of hyperbole
Man,
of
I
it.
literally play that way.
Right, perfect. So I know someone who plays that way. Uh,
You know who else plays that way? That guy who brought the Thunderhawk against me in the
Right,
LVO.
exactly.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is so there's these two different scales, and you can be in both places, right? So you're like a dot on this spectrum. Because I would say that I play competitive and casual. I don't like that those I play both of those things. And then someone else could play non-casually and competitive, right? They could be like super duper try hard. There's someone that maybe is harder to socialize with because they are only focused on the game, right? I also think that maybe earlier I like kind of shit a little bit on people who did do that, and I don't mean to do that. Like if that is really like that's your truth of how you're having fun, I still think it's important to respect that you're playing with another person and that like you're not the only person playing. I think that it's really important to just be a good human, but if that
For
is
sure.
the way that you like to play, like you want to just really focus on like the exactitudes of everything and like making sure that like you're not really interested in anything else that's happening other than like just hyper fixating on focusing on the board, and like that's fine if that's your vibe, that's cool. That doesn't make you lesser as long as you're not also trying to make it worse for the other person. But anyway, I think that that scale is really important, and I think that it's a weird thing, and it's sort of like bad for the like like sociology of the Warhammer community that people view.
Oh yes, we are getting real deep now. Let's
Yeah,
keep going.
yeah. I think it's not great for the like the you know the it's already like a space in which people can be very reactive and very alarmist about things, and then putting that into a thing where you're taking casual and making it sound like the enemy of competitive also sort of pushes an idea that to be competitive you can't be casual, which also means that you have to be aggressive in a certain way or like alarmist, or which is just as opposed to being casual, which is just not true,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah. I think it's like it's funny because there's a whole bunch of people who would say like I'm not a casual player, I'm a competitive player. But if you look at it on the axis, like when they actually go to their tournaments, right, that they are falling somewhere along the lines of they play the game competitively, but they actually treat it very casually because like I'm at an event. The majority of my opponents will ask me, "Hey, do you want a beer during the game, or do you want to just like have a chat, blah blah blah?" And you're like shooting the breeze with them halfway through the game, like, "Oh yeah, this," and like, yeah, you're gonna have those games where it's like someone's like super dialed in, being like, "We're gonna measure everything exactly to the millimeter or however you want to do it," and like that's fine, but that's not the most common game, right?
no,
And like I think people don't want to be told that they're more casual, right? They want to
right,
have the word competitive associated with them because they kind of, I suppose, they associate that with like being a good player, but that's not necessarily always the case, right? Because I would like, you strike me as like a super casual person to actually like play a game with, right?
yeah,
And I saw that in the games that I kind of hovered around and was like, oh, Ron's playing his game, and it's like super laid back. But like
yeah,
that doesn't mean that you're not playing it competitively, right? You're still
right,
there to get a victory. It doesn't matter that you get the victory from a more laid back position. What matters
right,
is that like, you're having a good time, and sure, if that results in a win, that's fantastic or whatever. But like, you're not out there being like, yo, bro, like you moved zero point 0.3 of an inch over the line. It's not
right.
happening, you know?
Well, and also the things too of it even being like not making people feel. I think there's a lot of people who allow things like takebacks, or like let's say someone puts a unit in a corner to retrieve battlefield data and then forgets to say it, but you know that they were there for that. There's even a sense of like some people will let you be like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm letting you do it, but they act like they're doing you a favor by letting you do it instead of it just actually being fine,
Yeah,
right?
let's dive into that because I know you and me have had some pretty interesting conversations about takebacks and like the kind of, I don't want to say like the culture around takebacks and no takebacks or whatever, but I guess like that's kind of what it is, the environment around it, how different people approach that. Like we're keep going down that train of thought that you're on right now. I'm curious about it.
Um, I don't know. That was mostly it. Like I think that in within takebacks, like I think that it's important, like ideally you play by intent where you talk out your intent of while it's happening, so then takebacks don't become a thing almost, because takebacks then are something where you're just reiterating something that was the intent you had said that you forgot to say again or forgot to like physically do because you already played through it when you said it out loud. And that's in a perfect world where someone's really experienced and good at playing by intent, where they say the thing out loud that they're doing when they do it. Like if I drop a unit for retrieve battlefield data and say, I'm dropping this here because in this phase I'm going to retrieve battlefield data, and then in the phase if I forget to say it, it's not a big deal, right? Because I've said it already.
Yeah,
But in
it's already
general, it just
happened.
yeah. But in general, like most takebacks and most things where people are changing what they're doing, especially things like in the movement phase. So the place where I feel like the most takebacks are, sorry, we have a kitten and the kitten is getting into mischief. Uh, the the one of the biggest places where I think takebacks are super chill, right, is in the movement phase, because the movement phase all happens like the order in which you pick how to move things and how you move things. You can really do it in any order. There's no one like the other player can't stop you, right? Like if someone's doing movements, I don't see anything that happens. Like let's say they move block themselves by accident. They're like, wait, can I do this in the other order? 100% of the time, I will be like, yeah, of course. Like it doesn't. I'm not trying to be here so you can counterplay yourself in the same phase while you're trying to do it. It's just not a. That's
Damn,
not
I've
like a.
activated my own trap card with this rhino.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like it's just not. That's not a. And I don't want to like look back and be like, oh man, I was successful in that game because this player like moved their stuff in an order by accident, then realized it, and then I was like, no,
Yeah,
that's not.
that's not a great vibe to win a game with, right?
Yeah, it doesn't
But hey,
feel
you
like
look
a
at your
great
phone
win
and you're like,
condition.
yeah, nice, I moved up 0.3%. Let's fucking go.
Right, exactly. And it comes down to the thing of like, and it's not that there should never be those moments of like where a game is close and then both players, like you can be someone who always plays casually and then all of a sudden for one turn, you guys are both like really paying attention, trying to play really like really are playing hovery. And there's kind of an ebb and flow and you get to that point sometimes and it's fun when you get there because
Man,
you're
it's so fun. Yeah,
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 and you're
yeah,
in like a good rapport with the other player when you get there. But I just
yeah.
don't think I think that takebacks and mistakes that people make, like at LVO, I played someone who made a mistake with their list, and they were gonna have to play uh through 250 points down because their list, and I was just like, dude, just play the mistake list. Like I don't want to. This is more subjective. Like I don't. I'm not saying I think everyone should do it like this, but I was like, don't. You can just play with the extra points. Like it does the extra unit that it's. They weren't playing over 2,000 points. They just had accidentally used too many of a data sheet.
Yeah, they'd accidentally broken rule of three, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, just use it. It's fine. I don't care about the thing. I'm not going to tell the TO on you. Like,
Mm, yeah.
because I don't know.
That
I'm just
that
not,
is a lot more subjective, I feel. I
yeah,
think it's a
that
very
one's
noble
that one's
thing to
totally
do,
subjective
right? But
for sure. I'm just
I
saying
mean,
I'm
if someone
all
rocked up to me and they had like 4 hectaton land fortresses, I'm not sure if I would let that one go by.
no for sure. And I'm also like that is a very that one is super subjective. I don't sort of prescribe that to how everyone should do things. I'm just sort of like that. That's just how I
Yeah, I
look
don't
at
think we're really here to necessarily like preach and be like, "Yo, this is how everyone should play the game."
it.
This is
Right.
more just about like I find it really interesting how you play the game. It kind of gels
Right.
with how I do, and we're
Yeah.
just like out here being like, "This is the vibe, right?" And maybe you want to play the game like this, or maybe hearing some of this stuff is gonna make you like reevaluate some things and be like, maybe I will enjoy the game more if I do it this way or whatever. Because I know a lot of the stuff that you've said to me, I've like brought that into my games, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm losing hella bad, but I'm still having a good time,
Yeah.
which is kind of the main thing. But I do think it's really interesting, like having that sort of understanding of when, like, why takebacks are sometimes quite important, and how like it can not be the most amazing feeling in the world to win because you were just like, no, you can't do that thing. I'm sorry, but like that's just how it is. And like the way I see it is like oftentimes takebacks, it's really funny. Someone will ask you being like, hey, can I do this thing again? And it's like nothing would have changed if
Right.
they like if they did it the way that they said they were going to do it. Like all those things would have happened exactly the same way. Like the way you say, they'll be like, oh, can I take this thing back in the movement phase? I'm like, bro, like it's your movement phase. You tell me how
Yeah.
you want to do it. I don't
Yeah.
care, you know?
Exactly. And it goes back to that thing too of like there's so much stuff that happened at the game of like all the way back we were talking about of like there being individual moments that are the things that really decide the game. And most takebacks that people want aren't things that decide the game, right? Most takebacks that people are asking for are like micro things where they're just feeling bad for a moment because they forgot something they meant to remember. And it goes back to like, oh, well, I'm trying to make some, like, I don't want you to feel bad. We're hanging out. I don't want someone to hang out with to feel bad. Like, do your thing. Like, I mean, I don't feel guilted into it, but it's not something that's ultimately going to matter. It's not at this point that is, and there's a line where like, if let's say you attack something and then something dies and then someone's like, well, I meant to use a stratagem on it because now they know that would have given them better defenses, and
Yeah.
they're like, but now they know the thing died. That's not a take back, that's a different play.
Yeah, that's like a that is like the line, right? That I was like, that's
Right.
kind of what I wanted to get to. Like, where's your
Yeah.
line?
So that's
How
like my
far can I
line. Like,
push you, Ron?
well, yeah, well, but it's like that, right? Like if someone's just talking about like having done a totally different thing after the results have been shown, then it's different, right?
Mm.
Like let's say it's like um someone moves to a place and doesn't say anything, and like you're 15 minutes later in real time, or you're like four phases later, and they realize that they put themselves in a disadvantageous place or forgot to use a stratagem way earlier or done something like that, then it's not really like a take back. It's like they're trying to counterplay what you're doing with a time machine.
Yeah, it's like they've seen a better play. Like
Right.
it's hard to rewind back that far, right? Because it's like, yeah, you're looking at that situation now where you're like, maybe I should have done that thing. It's not really a take back though. It's kind of like if you're four phases in, it's like that's just a mistake, and you got
Yeah,
to wear it at
exactly.
that point. It's like, yeah, sure, maybe I should have advanced that guy over there to make sure he was on the objective because I should have known that that other squad was going to die and then I didn't hold it. But like that's
Right.
different. It's like I made that mistake, right? It's not
Right.
a
And I find like in most games, like, you're playing a lot of people from different backgrounds and you're playing people from different places and different local scenes that play differently. But for the most part, it feels kind of intuitive at the table. What's what? Uh, like when it's a take back and when it's like just a mistake that needs to be going different. And especially if you kind of have a good table rapport with the person you're playing with, you end up with like a really natural flow of like, hey, this is where take back is fine, and hey, this is where it's not, because people kind of get that the game flow of um, playing casually and aiming for fun.
yeah, yeah, I think
So
so. I think it's like it is super important, like you say, to hit that rapport with your opponent, and like once you're kind of in that same environment together, once you're playing the same game. I think it was maybe you who said it to me, but it's like when you're playing 40k, a lot of the time it's like you're working with your opponent to play the game together, rather than
yeah,
like you're actually trying to play against them. Like you're trying
right.
to create this environment on this table where you're both having fun or whatever, and you're telling the story however you're getting your enjoyment out of the game, but you are effectively working with your opponent and you're going to be working with them for 2.5 3 hours. So like it's super important to be like on their level as well and make sure that they're on your level. Like you don't always have to rise up or stoop down to wherever they are. Like you should, I think a lot of it is like people are, and I say people, I mean myself as well. Like a lot of us are introverted in this hobby, right? And it's like super hard to project yourself at the table to kind of give off the vibe of the game that you want to play, which I
Right.
think is maybe something that an awful lot of people struggle with, and maybe have a tough time saying like, hey, it's like not okay to do that thing or something like that. Like there can be those situations which is something that I think us as the community have to overcome together. But like it's really hard. Like it's fantastic for me to say this right now, but like I guarantee you the next tournament I go to, there's gonna be one of those situations. I am literally just gonna turtle up and be like, do whatever you want to me. It's totally fine. I don't care.
Mm, yeah. Well, I mean, and like some of that is, I mean, it's tough. Like I can't, like from a personal standpoint, I'm pretty extroverted. I don't, that doesn't happen to me as much in that way. But it just, like karmically, it feels like the other person is bad, right? There's the thing with tournaments that's kind of a problem that doesn't happen if you have a good local scene, is that in a local scene there is a social contract, right? Because if you have a good local scene, it's really, I like definitely am very privileged in that I live in a place with a lot of people, so there is a really big local scene here. But in a local scene, if someone does stuff like that where they like are kind of trying to get one over on people or pushing something where it makes people feel bad, they will have a reputation of doing that, and then people will stop playing with them, right? Like there is a social contract that is real that you
Oh yeah,
are
for
signing when
sure.
you play. In a tournament, it happens less because you might never see the person again. So then it just, you kind of like just chalk one up to like the bad luck of the draw on the person you got, and you just kind of move on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I think you did touch on something there that like it is super important, right, to have a strong local scene because as well as getting the practice in and understanding your army better, getting reps and you know just improving as a player, I feel like it really helps you improve as like a social player in the game as well because you talk about the creation of these social contracts and understanding the I suppose behavior that's expected of you at a table as well.
Yeah,
I think people who you know might rock up to a tournament and like maybe they only get to play one game every couple of months or something. It's just so much harder for them to engage with the person across the board from them than someone who rocks up and they're like, well, I play, you know, one or two games every week. I know how we launch into this conversation of like, this is my list. This is what it does. Hello, nice to meet you. I am this person. Would you like a drink? Blah, blah, blah. Like all
yeah,
this kind of stuff, right? So I think having a strong community behind your back is good in 40K for like so many reasons. But I think like a hidden reason really is like improving you as a social player in the game.
for sure. And also, I think that it is important for players like that if you do have, right? Because everyone, you can't. A lot of people can't choose that. They can't choose whether they have a good, like, or a sort of vibrant local community or not. And I totally agree with what you're saying in that it gives you kind of practice in how to launch into those conversations, do those things. And that's also why I think it's really important for players who are comfortable starting those conversations or are experienced playing those games to be someone to spearhead the interaction at the table at a bigger event or at a space where you're meeting more strangers, and not in a way that would make anyone uncomfortable, right? Like if I'm playing against someone who's more introverted or who doesn't want to, like, isn't trying to like hang out so much or isn't trying to do anything, that doesn't mean it can't be more casual. You just sort of like get a more of a read on where they're at, and you try to like lead them into a space where they can be more comfortable because you have experience with it. And I don't know, I feel like, again, that's part of the social construct of it, or like the social contract of it, of being like, if you are a sort of like a have in the experience that you've had recently, like bring that to the table with you in a
Yeah, it's
positive
almost like
way.
a responsibility, right? That you're
Right,
bringing with you.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And not like, and responsibility is one of those words that can be so loaded or feel so weighted, but it's like, oh, a responsibility to have more fun and like play in a way that is
That's
more
all it is,
enjoyable.
right?
So it's
Yeah,
not like a
yeah,
weighted responsibility, right? It's just
yeah.
something that makes
Like
it
you're walking
enjoyable.
up to the table and you're like, "Yo, it's I'm the one who's bringing the party to this game."
Yeah, right?
That's all it is.
Exactly.
It doesn't need to be a big deal. I feel like maybe people listening to this might construe what we're saying as like being like these really big deal statements or whatever. But it's like, yo, we're just two dudes out here having like a good time, and we're trying to like project that to like other people to help them have a good time too. I don't know. It's just the buzz, right? It
Yeah, exactly.
like
Well, it's that thing too of like, there's a lot of like, people get nervous at tournaments. I feel like people get nervous when they play casually. People sometimes just get nervous while they're playing,
yeah,
and
of
I
course, yeah.
think that it's, if both players are nervous, sometimes it can be hard for someone to kind of like start alleviating the tension from the space.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, if one player is nervous and the other player isn't, all the player who isn't nervous has to do is just continue to be relaxed, and then eventually the other person will just kind of catch the vibe. It's not like you even have to, maybe they can't, maybe they don't really want to talk or they're not really doing anything, but by just staying in this kind of like peaceful place, the table vibe will become in a more peaceful place, which helps.
Absolutely. I think that it's like so true. Like that
Yeah.
speaks to me, bro.
Yeah, yeah. I
That
mean,
was deep.
yeah, that's what we're here. I'm here for the Warhammer sociology.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep, nice. Warhammer
Diatribes.
therapy with Ron and Dara. Fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Um yeah, well, it's just such an interesting conversation. I hope people listening are having as much fun listening to this as I am certainly talking about it. But I guess that kind of leads into sort of I suppose the kind of wrap up section that I want to talk about. But so from what I've gathered, like there's a lot of people who come to your club regularly that are maybe newer to the game or newer to a faction or whatever. And if you're in that position where you have this responsibility, the big word, of like mentoring them or like bringing them into the game, right? What do you think are like the most important things that you would say to someone if they're like, hey, I want to kind of play in a more competitive setting, right? Or they have the intention of going to a tournament in X many months, right? What do you think is the most important lessons that you can like impart to them to make sure that they are going to have the best experience that they possibly can?
Uh, so in a really like um literal sense, the first thing I would be like is memorize your data sheets. I think a lot of times you don't need to memorize every data sheet in the book, just the ones you're playing, right? And play a similar list a lot of times. The biggest advice I give to people when they want to start playing um, more competitively, in the sense of like they're thinking about starting moving into tournaments or things like that, is I think sometimes after you play a game, part of what's fun in Warhammer is building lists in Battlescribe and messing with your lists and playing with lists. But playing the same list or basically the same list a lot of times in a row offers a lot of opportunity to improve, because you're working with the least amount of variables while you're trying to improve, right? So a player playing a new faction or like looking to become a more competitive player, playing similar data sheets repeatedly will help them learn how to play the game tactically, as opposed to having to learn how new data sheets work. So I tell them to try to find a list that they like, that has data sheets they can remember, and play that with that same list a lot. And if you change things, only change very minor things. And eventually later you can start changing things where it's like every week you can change your list, every day you can change your list, because you understand the game really well. But at the top, I think that one of the big um like traps that you can fall into is like, oh, I didn't win because I didn't have this unit, or I didn't win because I didn't play this list, or I took too long because I couldn't figure out what to do because I like of XYZ. And it's like, no, like the thing is just you didn't win because you don't really know how to play a lot of the stuff yet, right? And what you should do is just keep playing the same things, figure out how the game works in a way that works with you, and you also start to figure out what you like to do, right? If you're trying to figure out how you like to play, it's hard to figure out how you like to play if you're constantly changing what you're trying to do, right? You need like a baseline, and then be like, okay, I don't like this. Like when I talked about the AdMech thing, where I was like, I played AdMech, I was doing this turn one Alpha Strike, and I was like, I don't like this. I know I don't like it because I played it, but I also know I don't like it because I played it for a bunch of times in a row, right? To get used to it. So the number one thing I'd say early is sort of like use similar lists a lot of times in a row to figure stuff out, and then memorize your data sheets if you're going to an event, because it'll save you a lot of time and it'll save you a lot of stress. I find that some of the most stressful times in events is that I see other people stress, and that I felt stressed about if I'm changing armies, is when all of a sudden I'm having to look at data sheets on Battlescribe, or I'm having to open a codex and sort of like swipe through, and the other person's just standing there waiting for me to say what my weapon skill is or something.
Yeah,
And then
just
you're
ripping
like,
pages out of the codex as you're trying to
right,
find what you're looking for.
when it feels, and you like feel this pressure to
Yeah,
go
it's
so
super
fast.
stressful. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
and
it's like they're waiting on you, right? They're like,
right.
"What's the answer, bro? What strength is
Yeah,
that? What strength are your
it feels like
berserkers?"
it,
I'm like,
right?
"Man, I
So
don't know anymore."
yeah, so definitely looking to avoid things like that. And it's interesting because it even goes back to like, oh, you want to play more competitively with an army, like it becomes part of a thing where it's like, well, focus on how to make the environment more casual for yourself, which is knowing the list and knowing your data sheets and your rules as well as you can. And that's like
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like probably the biggest kind of like track in. And I also think that it's a little bit of like kind of ignore the internet a little bit. Like there's just a lot of circle talk that it's really easy to get trapped into, because for a lot of people who aren't like lucky enough to have a lot of places to play frequently, a big part of the game becomes theory crafting online. But that is theory crafting online. That's not playing. And if you are someone who is actually playing a bunch in a row, use your games that you are playing to theory craft. Use
Yeah.
your games that you're playing to figure stuff out. Don't go online and be like, hey, a bunch of these people talking about this thing are
So what you're saying is like everything that we're saying right now, just write it off.
no,
Don't
because
listen to this.
it's fine, because this is all just therapy, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
Like online
The
therapy is
check will be in
fine.
the post.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, as far as like real, okay. So
I
I'm being
absolutely
cagey
like
about it.
underwrote that, but
Really,
you're
I'm
so
talking
right.
about. Wait, hold on. Do not go on the Warhammer competitive Reddit and then just do what it says. That's
There we
basically.
go. We got you to do the call out eventually.
Yeah, that's really what I'm saying. Don't do
Yeah,
that.
it's okay. You can say these things here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, I mean, it's like a balancing point, right? It's about understanding that you can have those conversations online with people. You can engage in those forums wherever you might find it, be it the Red Pat Discord, be it Facebook or a subreddit or whatever. But like, you need to understand that maybe not necessarily every single person that you're talking to is like a specialist at the game or knows exactly what they're talking about. Like, there was that really interesting survey from Goonhammer a couple of years back where they kind of worked out the ratio of people who actually go and play in tournaments versus the amount of people who are actually active on the Warhammer competitive subreddit. And it was pretty interesting that the vast majority of people there either play one tournament every year or don't play at all. So the real life example, I would say, and I think this is probably something that maybe you found as well, but like people in general have been finding is, right, when the book was coming out, the World Leaders Codex, loads of people were like, "Oh, the blood tide, the blood tide, the blood tide. It sounds great." Blah blah blah, and working out ways that they could use it, how it was going to work in game, like what the budgeting strategy would be. And I think almost every single person, once they started playing the game, was like, "Oh my god, the blood tide in game is so different from what I imagined," and you just had to experience it, right? So loads of people. While you can talk online all day, you can theory craft, and like you said, it's just theory crafting. When you actually get down to the practice and your own repetitions, you have so many variables that aren't in the conversation online, like your own personal playstyle, the decision making that goes through in your own head, and the your ability to react to situations on the battlefield that suddenly surprise you that weren't in the theory crafting aspect, right? Those are all really important things that just don't factor into the online conversation because they're super personal, and also it's just like hard to talk about those things in general, right? Like, I can't come to you and like say definitively why leviathans work for me and don't work for other people, but like I know it's part of my playstyle and how I play as a person. But like someone who's like, "Hey, break that down for me online in a discussion," I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't, they're just the dudes that work for me, right? And I think it is important to separate yourself sometimes from that online conversation and be confident in your own ability and your own decision making, and understanding that it's okay to try something out and it's not amazing the first time or the second time or the third time, but maybe you start to master it or whatever, and you get a hang of it and you put your own stamp on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like everything you're saying, like 100%. I just like that is exactly how I feel about all that stuff. Like my example of like the Leviathan thing is like with the when we were using the cast Space Marine Codex for World Leaders, I could not use Abaddon. Like Abaddon was good, and I just couldn't get it to work. I tried, and I was like, this just doesn't fit my play style, right? It doesn't mean that like objectively he is a good unit, right? But I like it didn't work for me, and I knew that from playing it. And then regardless of what it says everywhere I look, like it just doesn't work for me. Doesn't mean it's not good. It's just not good for me.
Yeah.
So I think that the stuff you're saying, I just like I very big agree with those things.
I think it's difficult though. Like, I feel like it's really easy for you and me to kind of say those things because we have a decent amount of experience behind us and are all kind of confident enough in our own. I don't even think it's really ability. I think it's personality, right? To be
Right.
like, "Cool, this is my thing and this is my playstyle," or whatever. But like someone who's maybe a little bit more vulnerable to being swayed by the opinions of others might be like super reactive to someone online saying like their idea is really bad or something. But like, you just got to remember that like that person online who's saying those things to you, maybe they've never played a game of 40k, right?
Yeah, I mean, not to like toward the end of the thing like blow this up completely, but
Oh, please do.
that's probably a good thing to say about everything everyone reads online about anything in any way possible.
Oh yeah.
Like, don't let it don't let it infiltrate you too much all the time.
Unless it's therapy through 40k.
Unless it's therapy. If it's yeah, if it's Dara saying it, then yes. And if he's interviewing someone, then you should like definitely they know what they're talking about for sure. Otherwise, he wouldn't interview
100%.
them, obviously.
It is important though, and I think it comes with time. Like the things that we're saying now, putting that into practice. If this is your first time hearing it, like putting all that into practice, working out how you're going to bring that into your sphere of gaming, your ecosystem. It's not easy to do. Like you gotta work on that. I didn't like start playing competitive 40k, and I'm sure you didn't either, Ron. And it was just like, oh yeah, cool. I ignore the internet all the time. I'm super cool bringing this like wildcard list. I was like, oh my god, no, tell me about the Red Corsair Battalion in 8th edition. I
Yeah.
need this thing in my life and I will run it in every single game. Like, you
Yeah.
got to develop your own style after a while. And we've talked about it in Chill Game Learn episodes and lots of other things too. But like, the development of a personal style is like super, super important, I think, to having an enjoyable time in 40k.
Yeah, and also having a thing where you really feel like at the end of the game feeling like, oh, like I played this game and like I did well. You'll feel a lot of ownership over your games that way because your games become your games. They don't just become like generic army game X versus generic army game Y.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's like a pretty nice one to close it out on, right? That was like a wholesome final piece. And also
Yeah.
nicely summarized that everything that we've just said, it's not worth listening to because you should listen to what the voice inside your head says.
Yeah. Live, laugh, love.
Live, laugh, love. Okay, so before we close it out, Ron, is there anything you'd like to say? Anyone you'd like to shout out or anything like that?
Shout out to all the homies at the Brooklyn Strategist. For any of you that are checking this out, y'all are the best. Shout out to the Red Path dudes. Shout out to the Las Vegas airport.
Yes, the place where our collective sanity disintegrated into dust.
Yes.
Shout out
That's
to the
it.
mushroom shirt.
Shout out to the mushroom. Rest in peace. Is it
No,
around?
no, it's on its way back, along with
Ah,
the. Oh my god, I forgot that we haven't even talked about this. So little story to finish off the episode. Ron's Warhammer World Leaders army is is an army composed of vibrant pink berserkers with glitter bases.
I prefer the word sparkle.
Yeah, sparkle baser
Sparkle
is your thing,
bases.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. But
So in a way, I think it's pretty good that that was like kind of the end because I think it nicely puts that line under everything that we said. Like just
sure.
in case you needed any more validation about the type of stuff that we were kind of talking about, that should set the scene quite nicely.
Yep.
Yep,
Just do you. Do you.
absolutely. Alrighty. Well, Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friends.
Yeah, man.
Absolute pleasure
Good
having you
talking
on the
to
show. Took too long to get you here, but I'm glad we did in the end.
you.
Thank you so much for joining us on All Around the World Leaders. And thank you, our wonderful listeners or viewers, or wherever you might be finding this episode. If you haven't already, hop into the Discord where you can talk to myself or Ron. We have lots of other ways that you can support us. You can find all that in the links below, but make sure you do all the like, comment, and subscribe stuff that everyone else says. So until the next episode, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.